Hello, this is the podcast from the international research platform SIMM, with reports and interviews from across the world on the role music can play in social and community programs. I am Lucas Perron. During this and the previous episode of the SIMM-podcast, we focus on practice and research of participatory projects of opera and music theatre. During the last episode of the podcast, we heard three wonderful practitioners developing projects in this field, singers Paulo Lamero and Sarah Terry and stage director Claire Pasquier. During this episode, we will be focusing on research in this field. I interview Graça Mota, François Matarazzo and Imogen Flower. Hello Graça Mota.
Hi.
Co-founder of the SIMM network, the SIMM platform, and very actively involved. Also recently on SIMM seminar, a research seminar that we organized together at Liceo in the opera in Barcelona, a research seminar on participatory opera and music theatre.
What I think that was very good in Barcelona was the kind of different ideas that came up from this small group.
Of course, the participatory opera and music theatre practice is somehow maybe not new, but I mean, it's in development.
Yeah.
And so to find people doing research in this field is not so easy because there are not that many people doing research now in this field.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that in 2024, in the autumn, we will be able to organize another SIMM research seminar on participatory opera and music theatre, this time at the Guildhall School in London, who is a structural partner of SIMM. And so we will be able to most probably discover other research projects.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
I see that some opera houses, of course, for sure the one where we were in Barcelona, Liceo, and some others are really keen on also investing in community work in participatory music theatre and opera. And this is really special because the opera houses, they have the means to really seriously invest. And the case of the production that the Liceo premiered in 2022 was the result of a 4-year collaboration with a whole series of associations in the neighborhood with which they developed this project. Mm-hmm. And it was asking for a big investment in time and energy and money.
Yeah.
And they're now working on another project which will come out in several years. And so opera houses, they have the means to invest in such a serious, longer-term collaboration and have the possibilities to also come up with interesting, amazing results. Because I saw the opera in Barcelona last year in 2022, and it was amazingly artistically interesting.
I think that one of the key issues for research in this area is to look at the concept of participation. What do we mean by participation? So participatory opera, so very shortly, we know it is we invite the people to participate. We work with people that participate and are co-designers of the end product. Is that so? I think that is so. So when we work with populations that are not musicians, or like in the Gatta Perduta, or the productions of
Gatta Perduta is the production of the Liceo in Barcelona.
Yeah, and for me, I have seen two types of inviting participation. The one is when the workshop leader or the workshop leaders, when they have a number of, I would say, it's not a very nice word, but I would say it anyway because I don't find another one, which is they have a number of recipes. Because they have been working so long with different projects, they know what to do in a certain amount of time to get the people to participate. And so they have wonderful recipes. They know how to put things together so that at the end of one day, they already have something very tangible. So something that you
Something
understand.
like, somebody like Paul Griffiths can do that.
Absolutely. So something like that. So just coming up and knowing, and these things are things that I have seen more than once. So I've seen that these people that are very good, these workshop leaders that are very good on that, they repeat that then in another setting, and they know how to repeat. They listen to the populations, they know, and they repeat it, and it works. It's good. It works. I'm not valuing it. It's like that. It works. But you have the other participation type, which is you wait that the people give you their lives, their way of using music in their lives, how they their rememberings of songs and leads and things that they heard all their lives, their musical life. So they are then workshop leaders that get that out, know how to get that quickly, because you don't have always much time, quickly to get people to participate and bring their musical life. And from that, those workshop leads know how to work with that material quickly, and bring something out. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, but also in terms of research, it means also to come to that understanding, you need to know the project really well. So, I mean, you can't just come in and do some interviews and go out again.
No.
It takes a lot of time to be within the project. You have to be able to take time is a really important element in research, no?
Absolutely.
To come to an understanding of how the facilitators work, and like the examples that you just give, but also who the people are participating, where they come from, and where they, because if you just interview them and take them what they're saying, to understand what people say, you need to also know them a little bit.
Absolutely.
At least a little bit.
Absolutely.
That means that it takes time, yes.
Yeah, and the research takes time. If the kind of research that SIMM is looking for is research that takes time. Research, that's why we speak a lot about participatory action research, because this is the type of research where you are immersed in the field and you have to have time to listen to the people and to figure out what it means what they say, what it means what they do. And also not only do that, record that, but give it back to them. Is that so what we mean? So, and that takes time, this type of research. So I think that's what the focus, and what I suggest, the focus for research would be that. I like very much that idea. The research I'm doing still, that's the idea that you just don't go and take everything from the populations you are researching and go away. No, you can't do that. Well, that's not the type of research that we need. We need, when we speak about participatory research, is participation in every sense and in every stage of the research till the end.
2 ways in the sense that we as researchers, we also have to think of how we can give back our findings, our research findings, to those who participated not in the practice, but also in the research.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This is not always easy to be able to do that, but it's an important element.
That's why qualitative research takes time. It's much easier to get in, give a questionnaire, have all the answers, make them enter in the computer in a research program and have it done and then write about it. That's much easier. I wouldn't say it's not good or it's bad, but it's quicker. You have the results or what you think are the results, and it's quicker. If you do qualitative research and you want to be rigorous, because one of the problems about qualitative research is that you have to look also for rigor. And this rigor comes from what you said, comes from this giving back. going back to the populations and saying, is that so? This is what you meant. This is what you said. Is that so? Can we use those words from you? For instance, you have direct speech. Can we use this direct speech in our research to illustrate what we are doing here? And so this is, for me, key. The key point when you work on participatory programs, with participatory music programs, and you do research about them, because that is the way to come forward. So how do we come forward? If we have to reach some points where we say, this is something which is acquired. We know that this is important, this is right, and this is a way, not right in that sense that there is only that solution, but it's a way to go forward, to learn from the participatory operas or musical theatre.
Let's go back to opera and music theater. It's about theater, so it's involving texts. So it's allowing people participating to share ideas, experiences, and especially if we're talking about newly written music theater productions, which are including stories that the participants bring into the project, which is often the case, and we know a series of examples of this. And so music as such and music alone is wonderful, but of course with texts, songs, and music theater allows even better to also include sharing experiences, life experiences.
François Matarazzo was very important in defining one of the key topics when you work with marginalized people or, communities that live in some art of deprivation, etc. And he speaks about that very, very clear, which is ethics. You can't do research in these areas without having a strict sense of ethics, what you mean by being ethical when you work with these people. And this is so important, so important. And this is not something that you...
Ethical in which sense?
In the sense that, for instance, François Matarazzo speaks about that when you work with people that are not specialists, musicians, etc. You have, and in that sense, sometimes a social work, a social promoting or wanting to promote some kind of social change. When this is something it's very, very much talked about. You have to know that when you enter that field, either as a facilitator or as researcher, you have to understand where is the power. Where is the power distribution? And this power distribution is always uneven. And you have to be aware of that, how you deal with that. There are people that have more power than others. And they have more power in the sense how they develop the program. They have already an idea how it's going to be. If you have money for 1 month, it's different to have money for 3 years. And so if you have money for 1 month, you have to get something very quickly. And sometimes you go over those ethical problems. And in that sense, it's one thing that you have to think about. Well, the power distribution. As a researcher, you have to have a fine-tuning, be fine-tuned to hear where is the power and how can you deal with that. And because it's very easy that you just overlook that. You think you are there, you are full of good intentions, you want to research a setting that you think is wonderful, is promoting change, is promoting social involvement and so, but sometimes you don't listen to the between the lines that people sometimes can be being used.
Yes.
And you have to be aware that you do not use people.
So it's another good reason why it takes time. You need to take time to be with the practice that you want to do research on, in order to be able to understand also that aspect, that element of its reality. Yes.
Yeah, I think that both the facilitators, the workshop leaders, the researchers have to have that all the time, though, in mind, so that ethics is inseparable from work with vulnerable populations. It mustn't be prison or whatever. It can be only a setting where people have social problems to deal with their lives. And you go and you take from them. And I'm very worried about that. So you take from them all the wonderful things they have to give. You put that on stage and you go and research that. And it's very easy to forget what is behind all that, all these moral issues, not moral in terms of, good and bad, but all these issues that deal with power. And you have to be aware, how is the power distribution in these situations? And the researcher cannot overlook that.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's plenty of good ideas. Yeah, thanks.
I'm always available when you want to discuss and talk about this.
Yeah, yes, of course, yeah.
Graça Motta just spoke about François Matarasso's work. François has been personally very involved as a critical outsider following some of the participatory opera projects which have been discussed during these episodes of the SIMM-podcast. The opera Gata Perduta from the Liceu in Barcelona and the opera productions which Paulo Lamero created with his organization SAMP in the prison of Leiria near Lisbon. François Matarasso is one of the founders of the SIMM platform and has helped also us a lot with his critical reflections on social and community music.
Okay, I have to begin by saying that what I know about opera I could write on a postcard. I've never worked in opera before being involved in this project, which is called Traction.
Yes.
So it's been a big learning experience for me since the beginning of 2020. But also, as for everyone, it's been a strange learning experience because I've been learning about opera mostly by not being present because we were all in lockdown.
Yes.
So Traction is a European funded research project, part of the Horizon 2020 research program. And it's a consortium of 8 or 9 partners, including research institutions in Spain and in the Netherlands, universities like Dublin City University and the Autonomous University of Barcelona, the Opera House in Barcelona, the Liceu, a music school in Portugal, and Irish National Opera. And it's trying to explore new ways of making opera socially inclusive, and specifically whether technologies, new digital technologies, can support the co-creation process. So there are 3 operas being co-created, and it's important because they are all new operas, and they're very different.
Newly written operas?
The largest,
yes,
newly written and composed. So the 3 are, the first is in Barcelona. It's the biggest, the most ambitious, because it's the Liceu Theatre, which just celebrates its 175th anniversary this year.
And it will be premiered in October, this opera.
Yes, but significantly, it will be premiered in the largest horseshoe-shaped auditorium in Europe. So for an audience there are, I think, 2,300 seats in the theatre. So to invite non-professional artists, performers onto that stage is a very evidently a risky thing. Many professional singers and musicians would hesitate to step out onto a stage like that. That project is being created with the community of Raval, which is a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, very lively neighborhood that the Liceu has turned its back on literally for centuries, because the front door of the Liceu is on the Ramblas, and the back door of the Liceu is on Raval. And so it's a recognition of a need to be a better neighbor. The people of Raval don't go to the Opera House, and the people who go to the Opera House don't go to Raval. And so that project is about the neighborhood and its character, and it's been created by a well-known Catalan playwright called Victoria Spunberg, who based her story, her libretto, on interviews with people from Raval. And the music is by a popular Catalan musician and composer called Arno Tordera. What I think is particularly interesting about the project, it's been already 4 years creation.
Yeah, that would have been my first question, in fact, that to set up such a project, you need a lot of time.
Absolutely. It's been slow. It was slowed down also by the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic hit the communities of Raval particularly hard, because these are some of the most vulnerable, poorest people in the city, people with fewest resources to survive lockdowns and those experiences. What I was going to say, that I think the interesting approach that the Liceu took was to look at the whole of its operation and how it creates an opera, and see if it could find equivalents in the neighborhood of Raval. So, for example, it said, okay, we have to have a costume department.
Yes.
We have a set building department. We have a musical department. We have a choral department. We have a marketing department. Who can we find in Raval to work with each of these departments? So there's been a kind of gradual process of mirroring the professional process of making an opera with non-professionals in the neighborhood of Raval. The key was working with a foundation called Tot Raval, All Raval, which brings together. Raval is a neighborhood with an extraordinary number of social organizations and community organizations and activity of all kinds. So they've been able to find partners for many of the things that they're doing. And so it's not only the performers on stage, and there will be, I hope, 200 to 300 local people singing on stage as part of a huge community choir. But for instance, the costumes will be produced by people from 2 social entities that support, in one case, migrant street sellers, and in another case, vulnerable women. And they will be working with the costume department of the Opera House to produce the costumes, and with the costume design. So it's a really incredibly ambitious and challenging project in every sense. Yeah.
I'm also curious to find out what the impact of such an immense project, looks like a big project really in so many reasons, what the impact of this project has on the institution and the working of the institution.
That is a central part of the project. We're facing both ways. We're as concerned about how the Opera House changes as any outcomes there may be for the participants.
Yes.
So the opera project in Portugal is led by a very different organization. It's a community music school in a village called Poços on the edge of Leiria. Leiria is a city of about 120,000 people between Lisbon and Porto. The music school was founded in 1873, so it has a very long tradition, almost as long as the Liceu Opera House. And it has its orchestra and its band and its choir, and has been central to the musical life of the village and the wider city for a very long time. Paulo Lamero, who was until recently the director of SAMP, the music school, started his musical life as a child in the band at the music school. And that was a journey that then took him to the Conservatoire in Lisbon, where he studied opera singing. And he spent several years as a baritone singing in the opera. Then he came back in about 2000 to Leiria and took over the school and has really transformed it into a very impressive and gentle, beautiful organization, which puts people fundamentally at the heart of what it does. I would describe it today as a community music organization as much as a music school, working with everyone from the youngest babies to the dying. As part of that, they found their way into working with the prison. And for many years, more than 10 years, they worked entirely voluntarily in the prison. They had some funding in 2015 from the Gulbenkian Foundation, and Paolo had this vision to create a Mozart opera. And I saw that production, I think it was 2015, might have been 2016, in the prison. And it was extraordinary.
Was that Don Giovanni?
It was Don Giovanni. It was performed by the young inmates. It's a youth prison, so for men aged between 16 and 25. And it was, in my terms, exactly an example of participatory art in the sense that it was created by professional artists and non-professional artists. So there were a mix of people, but the inmates were principally, they sang the role of Leporello as a chorus. So there were about 20 of them who sang the role of Leporello. The director of the prison sang the role of the Commendatore, which was a surprise to everyone. But why do Leporello as a chorus? Well, because one of the things that they understood from the start is you can't build a project in a prison around individuals because you're not in control of whether they will be available on the night that, or the afternoon in this case, that you perform. Because prison environment has restrictions and events happen that are not in anyone's control. And so you may find the person you're expecting to perform a particular role, for good reasons or bad ones, is not available on the day that you want. So that has been, they then did Così fan tutti 2 years later, and now they're doing an opera that has been co-created by the young inmates and some of their families, with 3 different composers working together and a librettist. And that's, I think they have discovered how much more difficult it is to create a new opera rather than to work from an existing score with, in the past they've been able to model their own creation on existing ones. This time they have nothing to guide them.
Yes, so you said that it's more complicated to develop a new piece with new composition in this context than to work on an existing piece like Don Giovanni or Così fan tutte, and where you can compare and connect to already existing productions and interpretations.
I've seen a couple of interesting community operas in the last month in the UK, and they were both new pieces created in one case by an entirely female creative, professional and non-professional creative team. In the other by, I would guess, 3/4 or more female. And both of the pieces were very impressive. They both came out of conversations with people, with women. One was about care for people with dementia. The other was about the lives of vulnerable women. And both took many years to create. What I think was interesting or impressive in both of them, which was something I probably hadn't understood before, was how the language of opera, the musical language, the symbolic, artistic language of opera, can find the human dignity in situations that are not conventional, not typical. And this has certainly changed my thinking. It's more subtle than the idea that if you do something in opera, then the glamour of opera makes it important. That's just like spreading some stardust over something, and stardust doesn't last. It's much more profound than that. So, for instance, in the second piece that I saw, which was called Take Care, it followed a day in the life of a young woman visiting her clients with dementia at home. And at one point, a man has a fall, and she finds him. He's been lying on the ground for a long time, and he's singing that he needs to pee. He says, "I need a wee." And she's having a conversation. There's a dialogue, all sung, between her and the wife of the man on the floor. And you would think, what an extraordinarily pathetic situation. There is none of the grand emotion or situation that you find in conventional opera, in a situation where there's a couple, both of whom have different degrees of dementia and consequently have their relationship is fraying, and a care worker, and there is a man on the floor singing, "I need a wee." But actually, I was profoundly impressed by the work of the composer and the librettist, because all of this has come out of interviews with carers. So the language, the words, the situations.
Yes.
So that has certainly given me a lot to think about, because, I've never been very interested in opera. I haven't especially enjoyed it. And that's partly because, to me, I'm not drawn to its stories or its situation or its musical language. So what this has been very mind-expanding for me and eye-opening and challenging my own prejudices is the idea that the language of sung performance, shall we say, of sung drama, can be so powerful in
music theatre,
in dealing with the kinds of experiences and stories that have been at the heart of the work I have been involved in. So that is certainly encouraging for me.
And now for something very different. Imogen Flower's PhD research for the London-based Guildhall School was on community opera made by and with sex workers. Together with Grasa Motta, Imogen Flower facilitated the SIMM research seminar, which we organized in 2023 at the Liceo Opera in Barcelona.
Imogen Flower. So good that you're part of this episode of the SIMM-podcast.
Thank you for having me, and I can tell you a little bit about what my PhD research is on.
Yes.
So it's been I've been kind of looking at the ways that community musical theatre or participatory opera might kind of constitute artistic activism. So the ways that a community group might work together to make a production and perform a production, and the ways that production might serve as a kind of a form of political advocacy, self-advocacy, because it's made by the group.
Yes.
And it's about their community. So my research it focuses around a case study of a project called Sex Workers Opera. And it's a sex worker led.
It's in London?
It's in London, yeah, but they have performed internationally, and it's got a lot of international members. Yeah, so it was founded by Siobhan Knox and Alex Etchart and members of their Experimental Experience Collective in 2013. And it was established, led, created, performed, directed, and all by a group of sex workers and allies in the LGBTQ plus community. Mm-hmm. And the group has always been at least 50% sex workers. So that means that it's been led by sex workers, but it has never been the case that people would necessarily be exposed as sex workers through their participation. Okay. So it's kind of been a neat way of making sure that people can participate without risking their safety.
Yes. So it's within this field of participatory music making, and in which sense is it participatory? I mean, in terms of the creation of the piece, the text, the music, how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of the music was collaboratively written, collaborative songwriting, and kind of the musical director working with this small group of musicians to sort of a lot of improvisation to kind of put the score together as well. And as well, the script has been devised by the group, so often through a lot of improvisation as well. It would kind of come into being. The inspiration for a lot of the material in the performance comes from stories that have been sent in by sex workers around the world. So they've received over 100 stories from sex workers across like 6 continents, I think, and 18 countries. And that's meant that they've kind of constantly had this input of material and of perspectives, and it's meant that they can really be an incredibly representative project, kind of working with the realities of sex workers around the world in contexts that the performers themselves don't necessarily have kind of direct experience of. So it's a good way of, it's been a good way of kind of bringing people in internationally, even if they haven't necessarily been able to participate in person as well.
If so much comes together or has to come together in terms of material, text material, music, I imagine it needs a long process, no? And a long period to work on. And how does that work for this specific project?
It doesn't. So like a lot of community arts projects, it's often very tight for time and tight for money. So I think, people in the project would probably say that there never is enough time. There's always kind of a scrambling to incorporate as many stories as you can without ending up with a performance that lasts for 5 days, and trying to kind of crystallize what the main issues are that you want to discuss in the performance. And maybe you draw on different stories in different ways. You maybe accept that you can't include them all because there are just too many stories. But one of the really important overarching messages of the performance itself is it ends with this song called Listen to Me. And the lyrics are literally, listen to me, and it kind of repeats this listen to me thing. And it has this, it's kind of become a bit of a mantra, but it gives this impression that there are just too many stories for you to hear within the performance. So you don't go away thinking, I know everything about sex work now. I'm an expert. I'm, the best ally in the world. You go away thinking, oh my God, I have so much to learn. Yeah. I will continue to learn and I'll continue to become an ally rather than, thinking the job is done. And that's a really important aspect of the performance as well, I think, to kind of instill in people the hope that they can do something about the problems that are affecting sex workers, but not to let them off the hook too easily as well.
How did you involve the people developing this work in your research?
So I've been involved in the project since 2017 as a performer and a researcher and a volunteer. So I had kind of pretty close personal relationships with a lot of the people in the project already. When I started the PhD research in 2018, I wanted to kind of find a method that would center the voices of members and directors in a way that also allowed a real focus on the art that they'd created, not just on kind of how the project had how it fitted into their lives or anything like that. I kind of really wanted to focus it on what they had done with sex workers opera. And the way that I decided to do that in the end was to hold kind of listening sessions. So people selected the songs and the pieces of music from the opera that they wanted to talk about. And we sort of arranged them into groups. And it worked that I would play a recording of one of these songs or one of these pieces of music. And then immediately after there would be a kind of discussion about that song, about like the political messages in it, the way it was created, any sort of memories or feelings about it and in general, about performing it or about making it or about just how it makes you feel listening to it afterwards as well, because a lot of the time you're buzzing kind of performing it on stage and you don't often take the time to sort of listen to a recording of it, or it's a little more removed. So I think that's been my kind of key method for doing interviews. I started out with kind of a few questions. One of them, of course, my PhD has been funded by the SIMM Guildhall Studentship, which is, I think, important to mention.
Good to mention.
And so my kind of initial, of course. So my kind of my lens is I'm coming at this from a sort of social impact of music making. But of course, it's not just a music project. It has this theatrical side, it has a choreographical side, lots of other things too. So my sort of overarching research question was to just ask, what is the social impact of sex workers opera? I think the main finding really is that there are a lot of things that might be called impacts of this project and this performance. And they're not always tangible. They can be very immeasurable a lot of the time. And that's actually equally important to the idea of sort of measurable transformation. So I think this kind of blend of like measurable effects, but also very sort of intangible, sometimes ephemeral affects as well is really important. And that's come out very, very strongly in my research. The thought of sort of what this project might even set out to do has also been quite interesting. I think from an external perspective, you might kind of look at a project, a community opera or community musical theatre project with a group of marginalised people and think that it was sort of intending to change them or to have an impact on their lives. And I think, of course, there are elements such as like community building and a lot of things like that are really important, access to art and to performance experience and stuff. But I think that the main thing is that this is actually a really vital way of amplifying people's voices so that they are better able to self-advocate. And that's incredibly valuable and really unusual to hear about, I think. I think often we might maybe get a little bogged down in how it's changed the people involved in the projects rather than thinking about how the projects have maybe changed perceptions beyond that group as well.
And of course, as we're talking about music theatre involving text, where you can vehicle certain messages, and this is, of course, even more possible than with purely musical projects.
Yeah, of course. But even within songs, you can say a lot in a song and in a very kind of condensed and concise way that makes this political discourse much more accessible to people who don't necessarily understand it initially.
The upcoming episode of our podcast is focusing on the role of composition and of composers within the creation and co-creation of social and community music projects. It will be broadcast soon. SIMM is the initiative of scholars and practitioners from 7 different countries and 4 different continents who felt the growing need to find ways to bring together people interested in developing research on the possible role music can play in social and community music programs. Sound engineer and co-editor of this episode of the SIMM-podcast is musician Mariusz Radwanski. Please visit our website at simm-platform.eu.